Harmatan season is set in a, I guess you could say, colonial or post-colonial, unnamed West African city. And Bubakar is a private eye and war veteran who is what they call in the book deux fois, which is basically mixed race. So he's half French, half indigenous, and he basically is forced into uncovering this conspiracy that threatens not only his city, the city of his home, but also the larger political order of this country that he is a part of. And this is the case with just about all of my books. Is I think about, okay, what do I think is really cool or interesting, and then I throw that in a book, and I throw this other thing in a book, and I throw this other thing in a book, and then it becomes a question of, okay, how do I make this all cohere? All these ideas that I find interesting, all these thematic questions that I'm interested in exploring. How do I make this all cohere into a single story? And more fundamentally, what brought me to Harmatan season was that Goliath was a very, you could say, dense book, very elliptical, very in many ways unconventional, but also very intense emotionally, certainly to write, and I imagine, to read as well. And I kind of wanted to take a break after that. I wanted to write something a little lighter, something a little bit easier to follow, but that would be fun, fun to write, but also hopefully fun to read, and something that felt a little bit more, and I know this is a very freighted word and has a lot of negative connotations, but I mean this in the most positive way possible, something more formulaic. And I lit upon the genre of noir, of crime fiction. And there's a mystery, and you have a main character who is of a certain type, and there are various other character tropes throughout, whether it's the urchin or the femme fatale, or the the wealthy real estate guy with some nefarious activities going on. And so I wanted to play around with all these things that I found personally very fun in a lot of the fiction that I've read, and I wanted to do so in a sandbox that I hadn't really seen explored in a lot of fiction. So colonial West Africa seems like the best and most interesting place for me to drop these characters. And part of this too is, I'm a bit of a Francophile. I've spent a lot of time in France, notably Paris, so I'm very familiar with French culture and French society. And so a lot of the French influence in this place sort of came naturally for me when it came time to world build, and what would this colonial society look like. I'd also done a lot of research into colonial situations throughout Africa and post-colonial situations, and what all those different things could look like. So, if you're particularly eagle-eyed, you may see bits of the Algerian War for Independence in Harmatan season, or you may see traces of Mali, maybe of Burkina Faso and Niger. And so that was, it was a bit of a grab bag. And part of why I wanted to play in this fantastical realm was so that I could, pick a piece of this country's colonial experience and this other country's colonial experience and sort of bring them all together to create this stew. Bubakar is a very down on his luck private eye. He hasn't had a case in a while. He's a people finder, and that's basically where he starts the book at. Somebody, whether they're indigenous or whether they're French, they come to him. They're like, "Hey, so and so is missing," and he has to sort of put together the pieces, find the person, or basically convey the news that that person can't be found for various reasons, and hopefully get paid. But business is dried up. He also has student loans, so he's in quite a bit of debt. And then this problem basically lands on his doorstep in the form of this woman with a stomach wound, this mysterious woman with a stomach wound, who subsequently vanishes after the police show up looking for her. And as Booba's sort of making his way through this mystery, one of the really fun things for me was seeing him interact with people he had a prior relationship with. So, as fun as writing The Urchin was, and writing The Urchin was a highlight of this experience, I was very intrigued by his relationship with Musa, who is this police officer. They served in the army together, and they find themselves at sort of, you know, opposite opposite ends of this societal line with regards to how they assimilate into French culture, how they or choose not to assimilate into French culture. So exploring that relationship was fun. There's another character later on in the book who I guess if you're being uncharitable, you could call a war profiteer, with whom Booba also has a prior relationship. And so being able to write these scenes where these characters have this history almost off screen is is one of the things that gives me a lot of joy and a lot of creative fulfillment because there's a richness to those scenes and those character relationships that I get to really um exploit and mine. It's interesting because a lot of it, I try to ground the characters locally, whether this is a real environment that I've set these characters in, or a known environment, or it's a place that I've sort of made up, or some sort of combination of the two. And so part of that is like in Goliath, for instance, the characters speak very, at least to me, authentic to where they've come from and where they are, with the references that they make, with their patterns of speech, uh, is somebody particularly married to subjunctive clauses, or do they speak in more clipped sentences? And with Harmatan season, I wanted really to pay homage to the genre and the way that people talk in the genre, which can be uh, sometimes somewhat cryptic. There's banter. I wanted to sort of play around with that and the way that characters will sometimes interrupt each other, that sort of thing, in a way that, I didn't necessarily do in other books that didn't demand that of me. So I try to think of dialogue as sort of book specific and situation specific.